My sermon this morning is in 3 parts, which will have a musical interlude between each of the parts. It is a reflection of my experiences in Minneapolis and St. Paul during that week in January that you just heard the invitation to. There are more reflections in this recently mailed copy of the UU World by other members of our Unitarian Universalist community, as well as if you go to the online version of the UU World, you can find more reflections by people who experienced this call. Why I went to Minneapolis. When I opened up the email from the Unitarian Universalist Association of Ministers on January 16th, I immediately felt a very deep level that I was being called to show up. I imagined that this is what it must have been like for faith leaders and others to feel and answer the call to go to Selma, Alabama, a little over 6 decades ago. My thoughts turned to our Unitarian Universalist martyrs, Viola Liuzzo and the Reverend James Reeb, who responded to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s call for people of faith to show up in Selma after Bloody Sunday on the 7th of March, 1965. There was no doubt in my mind that I wanted to do my part. I grew up in Minneapolis. The chaos and violence of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and Customs and Border Protections, CBP, are impacting people I know and love by causing harm in places where I have called home all of my life. The first thing that I did was to text 2 of my siblings to see if either of them could provide me with a place to stay in St. Paul. I heard pretty quickly from my sister that she could open her home to me, and after I spoke with my partner about my plans and receiving her complete approval and support of my call, I booked my travel. I registered for the March event. Then I attended the Know Before You Go webinar a couple of days later. One of the things they urged all of us to do was to write up a letter for our loved ones about why we were going to Minneapolis. The reality of risk was lifted up frequently. I understood their urging us to write about our decision to answer the call as a multifaceted task, one that would help us to self-reflect and clarify our motivations, including in the case of any untoward turn of events. There would be documentation in our own words, should they be needed. We were also advised to bring our passport or a photocopy thereof, as well as to make sure that loved ones knew where to find the same if something occurred requiring proof of identity. All of this was easy enough to articulate in my thought processes. It was and has been much harder to get it down on paper or into a computer file. It was a gut reaction. And while I am not a person who leans heavily on biblical scripture, it is straight out of the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 6, verse 8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." It was a no-brainer, all about my heart. When love calls us on, we answer and loudly proclaim the side we are on. I needed to embody what I had been saying out loud for so long. I needed to take risks to the extent that I felt I could at this time in my life.